and stuff like that. Just a second, my dog's trying to get out. She doesn't know how to get out. So let me just see. Okay. So what I was hoping to do today is share some ideas with you, because I kind of did some work over the weekend on this, and was hoping that you could maybe give me some thoughts and comments, and I will go briefly through these thoughts about how we would approach the workshop and ideas and things like that. So please let me know if you see the slides. Is that you see the slide? Okay. So this is the slide. I'm not gonna, we talked about this many times, that people within organizations execute processes that may be enabled by technology. And, our expectations for this workshop is to have the maturity models for workforce and the organization, so that we can have this, maturity model. And what I think would be also useful is to consider, when we pick the maturity or build the maturity model, that we also have the tools to analyze the system state, so that there's some assessment method associated with it. And then the change management part is really, once we have a chance to the scale, the grading scale, and to see, how are you doing on the test, what do we need to do to, design to be state that we want, plan improvements, implement improvements, and stuff like that. So when we talked about workforce, we agreed that we would start with looking at engagement, and initially.
Can I ask for a clarification? Sorry.
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you go back a slide?
Yeah.
I was a little slow on the draw there. So just to make sure I understand, so we've got workforce and organization that we're following similar a similar structure, but change management is how we actually make the change in workforce and organization. So you're saying that basically change management isn't going to follow the same structure or process that the other two teams are. We're taking our topic and applying it to the other two.
Yeah, I think, yes. So the change management would, what we can do is look at, because it's defined as a process, we can look at the model we use for a process and see how we need to adjust it. And if we look at the that we because the change management, you may need to make changes not just to the workforce and organization. You may need to make changes to business processes. You may need to implement technology.
It applies to everything.
Yeah. Yes, so it applies really to everything. So the maturity model for change management, I think once we nail down these workforce and organization, it'll be something that'll be input to the change management. But there may be other inputs, such as, analyzing how we're doing with processes and how we do, whether we need to, add some new technology. But it all allows us these maturity models and assessment tools for workforce or organization would help us to consider the workforce and the organization as part of the change management. But change management is like a little bit bigger.
Okay, that makes sense. And again, I'm just making sure I'm tracking. And then on the maturity models, you can do a maturity model for workforce and for organization. You could also do a maturity model for change management. But because it applies to other things and it is the actual process, then you can talk about it like a readiness versus a maturity.
That's correct. Yeah, we can. And I thought that this is something that these two maturity modules will inform change management, but change management will have to consider other things as well, and it will have to sort of define a process, and there will also be, how mature that process is. Are you considering these things? You're not considering them. But I didn't think that it would be, I thought it would be confusing to try to address them at the same time, because they're different in nature.
Okay,
Don,
I just wanted to make sure I'm tracking.
Don,
Okay.
it's not to say that you couldn't have a step of your process at the front end to deal with readiness, for change, and just incorporate that as a process step along the way.
Right, got it. Okay.
As part of the maturity model for change management, you could say readiness. Are you ready for it? Not ready at all? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So for the workforce, I had looked at Gallup, and also something that where Parijat helped me a lot is she clued me into this work that the federal government's done on the employee engagement, and there it's it's a bit different. So the Gallup, than what the consultants are doing, such as Gallup. So Gallup basically has these 12 questions, and they produce this engagement index, whether engaged, not engaged, and actively disengaged. And it's been applied very broadly, but it wasn't clear to me. First of all, it is more expensive because you have to pay for it. We have to most people engage consultants to do it. And also it's proprietary, and it's kind of fairly targeted fairly narrowly. When I looked at, read through these government, this is federal government, through their reports, I also found that they use this reference that comes from Rutgers, a new framework for employee engagement. So I'll show how we could include these things to augment and help us within the framework that we've already identified. So I took the liberty of constructing a kind of diagram that shows from that Rutgers work how this is sort of their model for, not maturity model, but their model of what of employee engagement. So on the left side is the organization, and on the right side is the workforce. In the middle, it's actually these individuals. And I'll kind of break down very quickly how this work. My proposal is that when we look at this,
can I ask something
go
before
ahead.
you get into that? Yeah. So
Sure.
I guess we have a basic framework or model that we're already using in the employee engagement area. So why do you think that's not adequate? Because I'm just afraid of kind of complicating things too much by putting a model on top of a model. Why is it that the categories that are already outlined, and I forget which framework you used exactly, like what's the advantage of putting these additional considerations in there?
Okay, Scott, somebody's there. If you can admit them, that'd be great. So to answer your question, I thought that, I don't know if I said this in the previous slides. The model, there's nothing, I will show how we will integrate these things into the models that we have right now. And when you talk to models, you're, I think, talking about those things that we developed for the maturity models from Drive and from Patrick Lencioni. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. So I'll show how we're going to connect these two. And the reason that I thought this would be useful is because in addition to that, as we define this maturity model, that we can have some certainty that we will also have a method to be able to assess this maturity, and that we'll have some instruments that help us there. Because if we develop a maturity model that is completely free of, how should I say, from scratch, then we may have to also construct a from scratch an assessment method. And if we consider the assessment method at the same time, we can, sorry, what, Scott?
No, I'm just going to say the summary, Alice, is that basically there's some other stuff out there, and next month there may be some more stuff out there, but this is really a more integrated set of information that a core group like this group might want to understand. But the idea is to say, what do we pick out of it in order to basically inform what we were already planning to do, that's going to be in terms that those other groups were already dealing with. So, but you'll see that this is more robust and it's more integrative, and it accomplishes more. It's just not everybody is going to want to go get up to speed like you're saying on this. What we're going to do at the workshop is going to be going back to, some key things that we're going to basically update. So I think if you bear with Cello, there are a bunch of slides, and as he goes through it, I think what you'll see is that he is integrating it into what we're already doing. It's just takes time to get there.
Okay, yeah, I guess that was my concern, is that, we've already told people, like, here are the buckets we're going to be putting these things into and how we're going to frame engagement, and then like saying, oh, and here's this whole other thing too, it just get to be overwhelming. But if you're saying that we're not giving all this background to everyone, we're just going to integrate it in, I think that's a much better approach.
Yeah, this group needs to understand. Yeah, but go ahead.
So if you just, I share your concern. I share your concern. I don't want to confuse people, but what the balance I'm trying to achieve is that it seems to me that it would be better if we do have a pre-baked thing that we can put a straw man on the table next week, rather than have a freewheeling discussions. Because we have about 20 people signed up for each of the workshops. We have 60 minutes, which when you look at, which is if we use the time completely efficiently, had no presentations, would allow for 3 minutes of engagement per person. So I'm trying to pre-bake as much as possible to simplify it and have still a scientific rigor, so that as we go forward, we are kind of anchored in things that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So just bear with me for a little bit, because, for example, I'm not going to. So on the left side are really the drivers for the engagement, and I thought we have a model for engagement, but I think it's also useful to look at the drivers on the organization side. In this model also allows us to, as you can see, it separates the stuff that organization or organizational culture has to do to drive the engagement on the right side. So, but maybe it'll be helpful if I just actually, so the first component is management, then the second component is leadership, and this is from the, these documents. And the third one is perception of fairness. It will map to our existing framework, you'll see. When we look at the actual engagement, these are the things, the sort of foundation, the conditions for engagement. And you may remember that there was a lot of talk about psychological safety. Well, you can at least place that item here within a bigger context. And it would provide us to kind of not get lost in get lost in many little details and aspects with, so we can't see forests from the trees. So this is the key. We were going to look at engagement. So these are the drivers that we would consider, and these are the aspects that we would look at. But let me just continue. So somebody last time asked, how well are we going to look at outcomes? Are we going to look at characteristics or drivers? Well, it actually this identifies which are the drivers and what are the outcomes. So the behavioral engagement is actually an outcome, and these are the components. And then is why we're all doing this: productivity, quality, and so forth, and performance. So engagement drives workforce behaviors. So when somebody last time say, well, are we going to look at behaviors? Are we going to look at outcomes? I wanted to get around the confusion because the behaviors actually are outcomes, so that it'll be more clear. So this is sort of the summary of what the drivers are in kind of orange, and what the outcomes are. And these psychological engagements is partially an outcome, but it also then a driver. That's what I was trying to show here. It'll all make sense if you just bear with me. Mm-hmm. And I also said, if we look at these three things, management, perception of leadership, perception of fairness. So to understand how the organization perceives its own culture, defines the rules, views conflict, and then on the other side, how individuals in the workforce make decisions, take action. That would be our initial focus. We wouldn't look at personal traits. We wouldn't look at the top 3 job characteristics, roles, co-workers, because these are sort of traditional HR things, and it'll be, I think, would be impractical for us to get into it right now. So we have, excuse me, some drivers, and we have some outcomes. And now we look, how do we map these things to the categories and models that we have defined? So this is the how do we take this stuff and match it to the organizational culture model that we have here? And you can see that there's a lot of there's trust and collaboration on the left, there's trustworthiness on the right. But if we connect the assessment method to this structure, it will help us make sure that we don't get lost and we don't list characteristics that cannot be measured. So let's look at how this could be helpful for us. For example, that these are the questions from the this federal survey, which has been so far filled up by, I think, 1.5 million people. So there's a lot of kind of benchmark and information out there already. So these are the questions that are targeted for the leadership and about leadership and supervisors that we could consider and use if we want to. But we can also, from these questions, surmise how do they relate to the maturity. So for example, let me just look at the first one. When it comes to maturity on the organizational side, there's a question: senior leaders generate high levels of motivation and commitment. Well, if there's, and then, the range of answers, because it's a survey, is like not at all to yes, perfectly. So at least we can then look for inspiration in something here, not try to invent, the wheel, for what characterizes a mature organization from not mature. So it gives us a lot of clues. For example, on the the most impact that a person has in the workforce is their direct supervisor. So if you look at the section about the relationship with their direct supervisor, they support employee development, they support the work-life balance. these are all the things that we could consider when we think what is mature and what is not mature, and it would connect organically to an assessment method. So if you look at that, this is what I tried to kind of map out to show the connection. On the left is this column that shows of the model that the way we've defined. And on the right, I use the colors to indicate which parts of this assessment method may give us clues of how to define the maturity models on the left. So if you look at values and purpose, this is green. On the right side, it's senior leaders generate high levels of motivation, they maintain high standards of honesty, integrity, work well with employees of different backgrounds, communicate the goals. That really has to do with the leadership providing that sense of values and purpose. And also on the supervisor level, the same thing, supports my need, is committed to a work for its representative of all segments of society, treats me with respect. So we can have, we can sort out and maybe have a discussion of which one. But if this approach, in my assessment, in my opinion, when we actually look at specifically how you're going to measure it, would also help us define the range of maturity. So this is on the organizational side. I'll do the same for the people side, the workforce side.
We have a couple of hands up, Cello, we have a couple of hands up, and just to emphasize that on the left is what we've already come up with previously, and he just mapped some of this stuff to it. But
Makeda, so I'll stop this. Yeah, I'll stop to get comments.
Yeah.
No, and I think you may have answered my question. My question was sort of this new information is sort of our roadmap of how we move through the levels of maturity, right? These are behaviors.
Exactly.
Okay. Yep. That was my question.
Exactly. Exactly. So, for example, if we look at these questions 61 and 62, I have a lot of respect for senior leaders and stuff like that. And there's a range of, strongly disagree to, totally agree. You have a way to sense, where you are. And otherwise, anyway, so that's why this link is helpful. You're absolutely right.
Alice had her hand up. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe I'm being a little dense, but I'm just a little bit concerned because I thought at this meeting we were planning for workshops that are happening next week.
That's correct.
And last week we had meetings with all of the people who could come that basically told them, like, okay, here's what we're going to be doing in the workshops. We're going to take all of these things that you guys have already brainstormed, and we're going to map it to these categories. And sorry, that's my dog in the background. You can hear her going crazy. So we basically told them, okay, we're going to take these things and we're going to put them in these buckets. But now I'm seeing how these buckets are being mapped to something else, which I understand that that's going to end up being useful in the end. But are we saying that we're going to present this at the workshop, or why are we talking about this now when we're planning next week's workshops, when we've kind of already told people what was happening at the workshops?
I understand. And if you hold that thought, I think I'll be answering your question. Part of the answer is that the information that was available, that I was able to access before, mostly came from consultants, and like Gallup, like Cameron and Quinn methodology and things like that. And it was very different in tone, in scope, in level of completeness, and assessment. This information was recently provided to me by Parijat. So I went through all this stuff in the last week. If I had known, if I had access to this information before, I would have approached this thing, a little bit differently. But this information came to my knowledge, and I'm very grateful to Parijat to say, maybe we should look at this information from the federal government, Office of Personnel Management. So, and that is really targeted for like HR people. And being an engineer, I haven't been exposed to it before. Once I was exposed to it, I tried to find a way, which I'm trying to explain, how we do not plan to abandon this, but we will also, but we will have a more solid connection. The other last week when we're talking about preparing for the workshops next week is the logistics of moving these stickies, managing so many people, putting the sticky notes there, moving them around, how to do it. We'll have at least 20 people in each session for an hour, moving the sticky notes. How well are we going to be able to be a funnel to actually get to something that's actionable? If we
But
had, sorry.
Alice, I think, Cello, you're going to want to get through the rest of it. It's going to get back to exactly your interest and concern, Alice, where it's not in the workshop itself. It's not really going to be that different, except there may be there's some pre-work to create a base case to respond to. But it's still of the same nature that you were expecting, but we have to kind of get through the rest of his slides. He wanted you all to see basically behind it in terms of other data and information that has come into play. That's kind of what's going on here, and there's a lot of sense to it. But the workshop itself isn't going to be way different than what we planned before, and it's not going to run through all this. It's not into, people can view this, but it's not. We're not going to spend an hour going through this. We're going to get down to business. But go ahead, Cello.
So when we look at the organization, the foundation that we had was trust and collaboration. So there are these categories of behavior linked with perceptions. So we can also draw information from there. So the same thing just applied again. Again, we're going back to the model that we already have defined before for workforce with mastery, autonomy, and purpose. So let's see how that maps to this new information about, this Office of Personnel Management. If you look at the measurement assessment methods, they look at these management, leadership, and perception of fairness. So these are the pre-baked questions that also have a lot of benchmarking kind of information because 1.5 million people have taken it, where we can actually get ideas on the characteristics of these. How do we structure, what does it mean, something for the mastery, for example, 47, supervisor in my work unit, support employee development. That's related to mastery. So we can say one of the characteristics of maturity on the mastery is, from the people side, is that the managers support the employee development. It's just an example. I have trust and confidence in my supervisor, which drives this conditions for engagement. And if we look at we added fairness and inclusion, these materials include this thing called inclusion quotient that has, again, and I've mapped it to things that have to do with fairness, with openness, collaboration. So I know it looks more complicated, but it actually is, I think, supporting us in defining this based on something that has a matching assessment method. And if you look at these statements here, they can be used as a, okay, so this is how, in a mature utility organization, these kinds of things should be working well. So if, for example, number 24, in my work unit, differences in performance are recognized in a meaningful way. So the if we look at it, these are some of these things have to do what the management has to do, organization, and some of them has to do the impact on the workforce. So here, for example, if you can look at trust and collaboration, managers promote communication in different work units, support collaboration about work units. So you can say, we don't have to study all these, but we can use these as a reference as we define what is happening well, how to define a mature or a not mature, and we immediately have an assessment method to help us get there. So in the workshop, we will still start with these things that we will start on Monday. We're gonna do the right side. On the Wednesday, we're gonna do the left side for organization culture, and we will also, these are the sticky notes. What I did is I tried to mark the sticky notes to how they map to the layers that we have defined. And what we can do between now and the workshop is consolidate some of these things. If we look at the left side, people are afraid if they speak out and punished if they do. Being punished for speaking out, fear of sharing ideas, employees fear change, and if it's just a matter, it was an attempt to kind of consolidate these sticky notes, see how they relate to the different levels and stuff like that. So this is what I was hoping we could do this week as a preparation for next week, because if all we so that it would be more, it would be instead of generating a ton of new sticky notes, we would consolidate these. We would start with a smaller consolidated thing, and we would try to sort of get agreement, and people can add new things, not a problem. But within an hour, if we could spend an hour with people adding new things, but we also have to kind of distill it actionable later. So we would not ignore these. So this is what I propose that we would do during the next week. So during the workshop, So during the workshop, I forgot to do this. These are the things that we would do, that I would propose that we do this week. Consider assessment method when we get ideas from the existing notes, look into these assessment methods and try to aggregate these ideas into key characteristics, so that when we start the workshops next week, we have this week prepared a straw man and have the leads, Dawn and Lisa and Zonetta and Mark Pauling and everybody on this call, get some agreement that the straw man is consistent with our model, which we didn't change those layers, the maturity model, and that we pre-populate the mural whiteboard with these kind of consolidated and aggregated ideas. So we don't start with, we currently have a lot of stickies, and if we keep adding stickies, it'll be, so this is what I would propose. I think this was partially answer your question. And then, so during the workshop, we would do this. We would shortly introduce the maturity model the way we would have it as a straw man, and have discussion with ideas that would include, new stickies, changes. But I think it would be not very, if we had a 2-day workshop in person, that we could do this differently. But if we have, between now and Christmas, we have these two, next week that we have to come up with something. So what I think is the only way we can get to something actionable is if we pre-bake some stuff, and we can, like the first 3 points, and we can change it all. It's not a problem. But we don't, you know, as I thought about this, it just seemed, and I'm reflecting also the concerns and comments that I heard last week. And so I tried to introduce changes that would, you know, address those comments. And then after the workshop, you know, the team and the leads can collect the comments, consolidate, revise, produce revisions, send out for comments, or maybe we meet again in January. But it's really, that's kind of the thought. So I'm going to stop here before I go any further.
And Alice
And
has
see
her
if-
hand up. Yeah.
Yeah, so let me just make sure I understand. So when people get to the workshop, those mural screens that we've all kind of looked at already would have
Yeah.
the sticky notes already placed in them. And the conversation would then be, you know, we ahead of time decided that these sticky notes go here. Do you guys agree? Let's discuss. And people could say, no, that one goes over there instead, or whatever. And that would be the conversation. And we go through each of the sticky notes. And then if there's time, we would say, is anything missing? And then those sticky notes would be written out and kind of placed in those boxes too. Is that what am I understanding right what you're saying?
Yes, and we wouldn't necessarily put all the sticky notes out there. So if, for example, some of them, you know, there's redundancy, there are, you know, things that we could find a common title or you know, thing.
Sure, yeah. I mean, the ones you read out, the first 3 were exactly the same thing, just said with slightly different words. So yeah, consolidate those and then
consolidate those.
Yeah.
Yes, and ideally, what I was hoping that we would end up with not more than 3 or 4 characteristics maximum for each one of these things, because I think it would be burdensome. And these 3 characteristics, so let's say that attention to results, let's look at this one. Let's say that this is a something that, you know,
it's kind of a summary statement is another way to look at it, and how many summary statements might cover the attention to results and accountability and so forth.
Yes, so we could maybe find that 5 or 6 of those sticky notes actually reflect this characteristic. So so that we, instead of having, you know, here we have 5, you know, categories, and if we had like 2 or 3 things on each, and we know that we also have a way to measure it, I think it would be more manageable, it would be more easy for people to understand, and they wouldn't get lost in, you know, like a million stickies all over the place and stuff like that, because these sticky notes were very helpful to draw the thoughts out of people. But I think that at a certain point in time, we had to kind of condense it, make it more clear, more simple, more easier to access, to understand, and so forth.
Also, it wasn't really complete, and it didn't really cover the full range. And so it's basically this additional research pointed out some other areas that, you know, whether it's pre-populated or whether it's just here are some additional potential new categories or characteristics, you know, that could be helpful as well.
So that's Alice, you know, because I heard, so, you know, we met last week and had discussions, and the reason that I decided to, you know, put a bit of work into creating the slide deck and reshaping ideas is because some of the concerns I heard last week were, well, you know, this is going to be chaos. And the word chaos was, you know, And everything here, a lot of it was driven by that and by the need to have more clarity, more simplicity, and a more integrated approach where when we have these characteristics, we actually have a way to measure them. So anyway, I know this was a lot to take, and this presentation has been posted to and I will, post a recording, and want to just see if people have any comments and thoughts. Makeda has her hand up.
Yeah, so I really like the connection between the different models and the new information with the what we had previously discussed. But I was wondering what you guys thought about maybe sharing that after the sticky note exercise, so people could say, we looked at one model, here's how it connects, here's how we move it forward, and that might address people being confused up front as well.
Okay, so what you're saying is we would, let me just understand. So we would keep things open, collect more sticky notes, and then and maybe have some workshop in January or something like that to consolidate this, so to keep the next week's workshops more as a basically collecting information and then introduce them more slowly to these new ideas. Is that what you were thinking?
Or I was just thinking we could just flip the order of the slides, just have the sticky notes first and do the connection to other models afterwards. But I see Scott shaking his head.
Yeah, yeah, I'm basically agreeing with you. And my concept was it made sense for this core group to understand, not everybody else. It's going to be overwhelming if you basically say, oh, now everybody look at this. It's like, but it's important to actually have the intellectual, academic, whatever framework that a core group of people who are more involved and the leads and stuff basically endorse the direction that we're going, because we have to think ahead to assessment, and there happen to be some pre-baked questions. Those could be changed, but it's all better integrated, but it's not, and then kind of predefining, doing some consolidation of stuff so that they can work with it, and it's not going to be 50 or 100 stickies that we're playing with. It's like, here's the base, how does that look? Comments, go around the circle, and then you basically say what isn't here that needs to be, and then you just add those, and that's pretty straightforward. I agree, expose them to it later if they even want it. Not everybody is going to, not all 100 people, let's say, are going to want to be schooled in all the details, but so they have come with different levels of interest, right? But it offers, we would have the opportunity for anybody to do that, but not as a pre-workshop exercise. You do that later. I think that was the Cello, if I'm mistaken, correct me, but I think that was generally the idea. It's kind of a question of what do you make available now versus later, and maybe make it available later rather than now in terms of some of this backup and pre-work.
Well, I think, Makeda, I understand your point, and I think it takes a little bit of elasticity and stretch a little bit to look at this stuff. I spent about 38 hours this last weekend trying to make sense out of all this. Yes. And so it is too much. This presentation I showed today is not intended for the workshop.
Okay.
Period. It is intended for this group, which is a smaller group that helps us shape the workshop. Mm-hmm. And so the difference would be in the workshop itself is how much do we pre-populate those things, and we pre-populate them strategically, that we put in things that we know are connected to assessment methods and suggest them, and give people a chance to change them, to introduce new ones, and stuff like that, and have a dialogue, because if I was listening to this presentation before I spent, all these hours reading these things, it would be a little bit overwhelming. So you're correctly say, so the idea was, so this is more like what I call in the kitchen discussion. This is not what would be served in the main dining room. This is just like, okay, how do we peel the potatoes? How do we do this? And I wanted to get concurrence on that, so that we have also then a critical mass of people, because we have three calls this week with a smaller core teams, and then say, okay, and if enough people buy into it and enough people help build this simplified, straw man, I think we would have a better chance to get meaningful participation.
Yeah.
And I'm apologizing for making things more complicated as usual.
Zanetta, you want to go off mute and offer some comments?
I don't know how this is going to work next week. I'm really concerned. I don't know who's all going to be involved or who's signed up, but if you've got people who are outside of these three groups, like let's say somebody's been working on CIP delivery, I don't know how they're going to come in, even with the short videos, and for us to get anything meaningfully done. I really was hoping today, and I get Dr. Taylor, he spends a lot of time with this, but the problem of it is that everybody else is not going to have spent the amount of hours that he has, or the level of expertise that these other young ladies and gentlemen have. And so that's just my concern, is that we'll spend an hour and what we really get out of it. I don't see a clear direction on my part to be able to. If I had to go off script and explain this to somebody, I wouldn't be able to do it. I'm just being honest.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Okay. Let me just show.
So actually,
sorry,
Zanetta, we were assuming that a lead, and Mark's sitting here too, and Dawn, that they would give some kind of an overview of what we're going to be going through, and basically having whatever it is, clear, concise, key messages that are going to be, there, that this is, what we're doing, what we're trying to accomplish, and here's what we're going to walk through. That at least would be important based on what you're saying.
Oh, I agree. And that's what I was hoping, that we would have some concise thing that we would all have, because that's the thing, to have the same message, because we will get nowhere if only one group has all the information and other people do not, or don't understand it. So that's what I was hoping for today, was we would have an agenda. Hopefully we would have some process about what we wanted to try to accomplish, so that we would know what our outcomes would be. And I'm a process person, so I get the theoretical and what have you, but logistically, how we're going to handle next week, I thought that's what we were going to do. And I apologize if I'm the only one that's a little off. Just have patience with me.
I think that, to address your concern, Zanetta, I can prepare the agenda, mock up what they would be seeing on the screen, and put together the mural that we would show them, what it would contain, and then just say, okay, this is what we would start with, and this is what we would do in the workshop. So that perhaps not, perhaps it was a mistake to go get into all this detail, and I understand it can be confusing and overwhelming, but that's what I can do, and then we can see if that makes sense, And if hopefully this discussion, that this introduction will at least show that there has been a little bit of thinking behind that kind of proposal. I'm just showing you on the screen who has signed up for these workshops, and so that's kind of
and there's going to be others that will probably, in addition, will probably sign up. So, yeah. But so Zanetta, you were hoping for this meeting to cover a certain, that set, and instead it was, here's, some additional information, and now what you're requesting and wanted needs to be done, is.
Yeah, I think Dr. Cello has summarized what I think we need to have to be ready for next week. And that's, I just think we just got to be very, very careful that the amount of time we're taking with people, and we've got to have some kind of outcome or we're going to lose them.
Right.
They will drop out of this real quick next year.
Yeah.
If we don't.
Right. Mark, you got your hand up now. Go ahead.
Yeah, I do. So I agree. I think with what the discussion is just wrapped up to get those products out to us so that we can take a look at them and be ready for next week. I appreciate what Cello's done. Because I don't know, Zonetta, you may remember like one of our really early workshops, and I got all this input. I had mountains of flipped chart paper, and then I had to try and make some sense of it all. And I think what, if I understand right, I think what Cello's trying to do is, okay, so how are we going to be able to connect this all to meaningful tools that already exist, and make sure that the input that we get results in some really good stuff. And I think what he's done is tried to show us how that's going to link. And I think it is a lot to absorb in a little bit of time. And so maybe, we just take a step or two back. But if we know that Cello, that you're helping to construct the agenda such that these things that the stickies that we place or the input that we get from them is going to map something later, so something meaningful later, then that will be really helpful. And so I think I know what you were trying to do. It is a lot to absorb in a short amount of time. But I think what Zonetta and Cello have been talking about would be really helpful in terms of over the last few minutes here, in terms of having that agenda, and then how do we help folks really feel like they walk away thinking, wow, I felt like I really engaged in that workshop.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you, Mark. But you got to remember, we were the first group that's been from the beginning, and we have people that are just now coming in, and I think that's what I was trying to articulate. Yeah. I got everything he said, but in terms of the workshop itself, somebody coming fresh in, who just watched 13 minutes worth of video, how can we get the most out of it for an hour? And that's, I don't want to keep belaboring and keep running my mouth, but that's what I'm just trying to, how can we bridge that? That's all.
Yep.
Not a criticism, just.
Right. I think as long as the project team and this group understands that the input is going to link to something bigger and better later, that's the key part. And so now we just need to make sure that, as you say, the folks next week don't get overwhelmed and they feel really involved and engaged.
Yep.
Makeda has her hand up.
Oh, no, I agree with what everybody said. And in light of sort of how you explain that this is additional background information for this group as we walk into further planning, I think it's very helpful, especially I know a lot of people have very linear mindsets. So we're going to have to sort of really connect the dots for people between the different models and what does it mean for them. Yeah. So any guidance or messaging you have around how the dots and how we can connect those dots for people would be helpful as well.
Yeah, and I promise not to drag you too far into the kitchen too often.
But it did seem like this group, and Cello's been saying it all along, that we need to have the leads, and a couple other few people, and there's maybe a couple more people who are really kind of understand the theory behind it and how things integrate. And so you know, it was like a call, do you do that now or do you do that later? But this group, you know, should be an ongoing group that, you know, helps guide this through the process.
Yep.
So what I'll do is, as usual, what Zanetta asked for, and I think it makes a lot of sense. So what I'll do is, as on a work day, you know, I have to kind of occasionally pay attention to my day job. So as soon as I can, I will prepare the murals for what the murals are going to look for next week, what the agenda is going to look like, and how people are going to interact with the information in the workshop, so that all this extraneous information, how I get there, all the spreadsheets and matrices that I've been working on, we don't need to share right now. But you know, I hope that if anything, besides confusing people and overwhelming people, at least, you know, there's a sense that there's kind of substance and structure underneath here, so we're not flying in just kind of collecting random stickies and you know, hoping for the best.
Mm-hmm.
Don, do you have any comments or thoughts?
I think I was pretty much in the same place Annetta was, and just wondering about a lot of people in a short period of time making a meaningful contribution. But it sounds like we'll have one more discussion to make sure that we know the format and what we're asking people to first, I guess, review and get oriented, and then to contribute. And then to the degree there's time and capacity, talk about where it's going. But maybe where it's going is another discussion, because an hour is such a short time. I mean, you barely get to say hello to everybody in that time.
Yeah. So I will do the murals, and I will do the agenda, and I will do the sort of description of how we're going to go about the workshop. I hope that I can do it later today and send to everybody on this call. And then I will not. I will put these slides kind of aside, and hopefully, because this has been recorded, so hopefully this will be, you know, you can, if you feel like torturing yourself, listen to me going through this again.
You know, and
sorry,
Harjot, you know, hasn't said anything, but she was sort of the stimulus, and Cello was the response. So, but you might, if you have any comments.
Right. I mean, I have done a little bit of research on employee engagement. I have worked on it for a couple of years. I was talking to him more about Gallup, but how we were not able to follow through the Gallup concept that's there, and how it is missing some of the pieces, especially probably for when I see it at KC Water. And that's when I recommended for this federal OPM thing that they have done. And we have implemented it this year, but we haven't seen any results so far with this COVID thing happened. And also we haven't been even able to share the results meaningfully. So I cannot really vouch for how effective it is, but this is something that federal government has been doing for so many years. And I have read through the documents, and also this makes sense to me. But I do understand some of the concerns that others are raising, that logistically, how are we going to manage?
Okay. Well, I realize that people have a limited time, so I will get back to everybody with some communication, like what I mentioned. I'm going to close the recording before I forget.
So
and
real quick,
sorry.